So let's not waste any more time. Let's introduce our guest speaker, Ramesh Bhai, who's now, I'm pleased to say, no longer a stranger for us, because he's been here already 2 or 3 times, and each time he comes and talks, he presents some amazing lectures, and the amount of information that he packs into the hour is just absolutely phenomenal. And I'm sure today is going to be no exception. For those of you who don't know much about Ramesh Bhai, let me introduce him. He's still a tutor and a lecturer at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, but is also completing a DPhil in yoga psychology at the university, at Oxford University, in the Faculty of Theology. But he's a very, very busy man. He's a trustee of the Chinmaya Mission, and he teaches Vedanta on a weekly basis. He also does a lot of interfaith work as well. He's chair of the Interfaith and Hindu Forum of Britain for the last 6 years. He's co-chair of the Hindu Christian Forum, and is also a trustee of the Interfaith Network UK. But if that's not enough, he's now just very recently been appointed as the Secretary General of the Hindu Forum of Britain as well. So many congratulations on that. So Ramesh Bhai Patni is our special speaker this evening. He's going to talk on the 3 phases of Vedanta: Śaṅkarācārya, Madhvācārya, and Rāmānujācārya. So once again, a big round of applause for our speaker this evening, Ramesh Bhai Patni.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak again once more. And I think this is a kind of continuation from when I did the 6 systems of philosophy in Hinduism. And I've been kind of tracking it along with different darshanas or systems of thought in Hinduism. And today I want to particularly focus on what is known as Uttar Mimamsa, or commonly known as Vedanta. And of course there are many variations of Vedanta. Vedanta is a very generic term which includes many different schools within Vedanta itself, different schools of thought. And we will see the 3 major ones which are there tonight, which are founded by or have been propagated by Śaṅkarācārya, Rāmānujācārya, and Madhvācārya. And each one brings a different kind of thought in terms of the ideas about God and reality and the self and the world. So we will go through some of the details, although it is going to be much of an overview because there are so many different nuances which we cannot actually go into because of the time factor. But we'll try to cover as much as possible within this 1 hour. So the 3 phases of Vedanta. It doesn't mean that these are the 3 phases, as I said, but there are more. But we'll focus on these 3 for tonight. So thinking about the systems of thought. Now, it is important to understand how these systems of thought have developed, what they are. And Hindu philosophy can be actually looked at from these kind of perspectives on reality, what can be called perspectives of reality. And the various assumptions which are made in each one of these perspectives are different. So, for example, if you make the assumption that there is only one reality, then of course everything else which follows from that assumption or fundamental principle will then give rise to a different school of philosophy. And the 6 darshanas which we're going to consider are different perspectives on reality, which are based on different set of principles. And how are these darshanas or perspectives actually arise is through debate and discussions between the philosophers and scholars who were there in India from the ancient times. So right from 10,000 years ago, there has been a continuous kind of debate going on about what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of the individual, what is the nature of God. These fundamental questions are asked again and again, and during this discussion and debate, various different perspectives begin to develop. So the darshana itself is derived from the Sanskrit root of drish, which means to view or the vision. So there is a different vision depending on which side you turn from, and the perspective which is then presented is called a darshana. Now, as I'm saying here, it is not just philosophy and theology. Okay, it's much more than that, because the perspective actually itself, based on certain fundamental principles, also has a kind of end goal in mind. It is not philosophy for philosophy's sake. It means that that philosophy is going to be used in terms of attaining a certain purpose in life. Okay? So this goal of life is then considered by all different schools of philosophy, and they say in order to reach that goal, and we'll see what that goal is that you have to look at the world from a certain perspective, you have to have certain practices which are based on those principles, and having practiced your own kind of practices based on those principles, you will attain the goal. Okay? So it is not philosophy, but much more than that, and it is a system which is based on what is known as the sutra literature, which I describe in a minute. But these 6 darshanas, which are considered to be the main darshanas or the main perspectives, are divided into the orthodox and the heterodox schools or views. Now, the orthodox schools take their authority and their guidance from the original Vedas. Okay? The Vedas are the oldest scriptures in Hinduism, or considered to be the oldest scriptures in Hinduism, and one can say that if we take into account the oral tradition which was there in Hinduism, then we can say, actually, we don't know when these Vedas actually came into existence. And of course, one school of thought is that they have no beginning, and they have not been written by anybody, but these are directly derived as revelations through the deep meditation carried out by the saints and the sages. So it is, in a sense, it is not written by or derived through any kind of intellectual process by any of the individuals, but derived directly through revelation and revealed, we don't know when. Okay? But as far as the written Vedas are concerned, we begin to see that 4,000 years ago, that they are then written down. Now, the orthodox schools then base their philosophies on the Vedic literature, and they take the authority of the Vedas as their the primary factor for them to distinguish themselves from the heterodox schools, which do not actually take the authority of the Vedas. And these I mentioned 3 of them here: Charvaka, the Buddhism, and the Jainism perspectives on reality. These are considered as not based on the original Vedas or the authority of the Vedas. So, these darshanas, actually, how are they written? In what form do they appear when they are actually written down? As you know, the Hinduism, there is a kind of Guru Shishya Parampara, what is known as Guru Shishya Parampara, which is the teacher-disciple relationship. And that is carried on from the teacher to the disciple to the teacher to the disciple right through the ages. Okay? At certain points, then this, what the teaching is condensed in the form of sutra literature. Now, sutra literature is a very specific form of literature which is written as a kind of aid to memory. Okay? So, for example, if you want to memorize the sutras or aphorisms as they are known, the aphorisms actually are condensed form of that particular tradition, and that sutra actually then gives rise to a whole text which is the foundation of that tradition. So the tradition is kind of systemized, it is expressed in terms of the sutra literature, and each sutra will give a certain essence of an idea which will then be remembered by the disciples. Now, because they are in that kind of sutra literature, what we find is that they are highly condensed and they are very difficult to understand. Okay. Because if the sutra contains only one word, what are we to make out of it? So what then begins to happen is that people begin to comment on those sutras. So now this is known as the commentarial literature which develops out of this sutra literature. And based on the commentaries, there are sub-commentaries and sub-sub-commentaries. Because everybody wants to have their own say, like all of us want to say something about something. So also, the commentators on the sutras will want to elaborate on the sutra which is written. And again, we will see that, the influences which are there in terms of the interpretation are actually based on the experiences and the knowledge of the person who is commenting on it. Okay? So these, what are known as bhashya, are the commentarial literature, and they actually are very useful in terms of trying to understand what that tradition is telling us. And this commentarial literature actually becomes now the basis of further discussion, further debate, so that a process of refining occurs in terms of the thoughts and the ideas of that particular tradition. So what are the kind of general features of this orthodox Hindu darshanas? Number one, they are considered to be the revelations of the Vedas. They assume that the principles on which the darshanas are going to be based, they assume the revelations of the Vedas. Now these are known as the Shruti literature. Shruti means having heard. Okay? It's not something which is thought about or created by the mind, but something which is heard in the deepest of meditation. That's why I was saying it's a kind of revelation. Secondly, the purpose of life, which is described by all these darshanas, is liberation. Now, liberation from what? Liberation itself assumes that we are bound in some way. So the bondage which he's talking about is that each and every individual is bound by what is known as the samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth and death. Okay? So each one of us goes through this cycle again and again and again until we realize who we truly are, and then we get released or liberated from this bodily form. Okay? So this liberation, moksha, becomes the end goal of all the darshanas, because they describe liberation to be attained, and they prescribe various different methods by which this moksha or liberation can be attained. Thirdly, they are exegetical in nature, which means that interpretation, explanation, and the kind of understanding which is derived from the sutra is actually the commentary, which is the one which is going to explain what the sutras are. They also assume a transcendental reality beyond the contingencies of the human condition. In other words, all of them believe that there is a reality beyond what we are experiencing now. Okay? So you and me at the moment are experiencing this individuality, and we are experiencing time and space, and we are experiencing a certain causal connection between action and reaction. Okay? Now, that is what we call the phenomenal reality, or the reality of our own existence at the moment. But what they assume is that there is a transcendental reality, a reality which lies beyond our phenomenal reality. Now that transcendental reality, as we will see, is described by different darshanas in different ways. Then the next thing is that it offers systematic explanations and interpretations about various things. So reality, what is reality? What is the nature of reality? Is what I'm seeing now is reality, or is there something which is there beyond this, what I'm perceiving through my senses and through my mind and my intellect? Is there something beyond that? What is the nature of that reality? How do I perceive? How do I know whether this is what I'm looking at is real or not? What are the bases of perception? What is that which I can call valid perception? What is that which I cannot call valid perception? And so on and so on. So means of knowledge is also kind of expanded by these darshanas. The nature of the self. Okay? Nature of the individual ego, as well as the self which is the transcendental self, is also described. God in various different perspectives is also described. And what we have is also the principle of causality. Causality is the cause-effect relationship And there are various ways in which the darshanas actually explain what is the nature of the cause and what is the nature of the effect and what is the relationship between the two. So, for example, when we'll come to the three schools of Vedanta, we'll see that they explain cause-effect relationships in different ways. So, for example, one says that the cause is no different from the effect, and they are one and the same thing. Another one says cause and effect are two different things, and there is no relationship between the two. So you can see how wide the explanations are in terms of these main ideas about reality, God, self, causality, and liberation. So, as I was saying earlier on, that even within one tradition, what we call Vedanta, there are various different perspectives of looking at all these things, as we will see. So, what are the 6 darshanas? The first one, we talked about the 6 darshanas in detail when I did the first talk on the Hindu darshanas here, was the Nyaya school, which is the school of logic and argumentation. So they have got elaborate systems of logic and the systems of how to think about various different things and how to formulate an argument and what is the nature of that argument which is leading towards truth. Okay? And how to discuss anything. So, the rules of discussion and how one can discuss is also described by the Nyaya school. They are more interested in the rational process and how it can function in order for one to obtain the ultimate knowledge. Then we got the Vaisheshika school, which is the atomist school. And it considers that, in fact, it is the one which is closer to what we call science today, because it talks about the atomic nature of reality. Then we got the Sankhya school. Sankhya literally means enumeration. So what happens in Sankhya is that they count each and every individual thing. So they will count 24 different elements of the reality, and each element is then described in detail, so that the whole concept of reality is based on enumeration of these various elements of reality. And it admits 2 principles of reality. Okay? And these are the dualistic principles of matter and spirit. Okay, this is Purusha and Prakriti, and that is what this school is based on. Again, it will have its own methodology as to how to reach liberation. Okay, so it starts off by saying that actually everything is suffering, and if life is about suffering and we are suffering, what is the solution to that suffering? The solution to that suffering is actually getting the right knowledge. Through what? Through the means of discernment, through the means of viveka and discrimination, and through that discrimination one escapes from this cycle of suffering of birth and death. Then we got the yoga. Now this is the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, which is my specialist subject because I'm doing research in yoga psychology. And this is the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, which is 195 sutras. And they systematically set out the whole kind of holistic method of yoga, whereby what is known as Ashtanga Yoga or the 8-limb yoga is actually arising from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. And it describes the whole methodology as to how we can discipline our life right from the outer transactional world to the innermost, subtlest forms of consciousness. Okay? And that method of actually doing the spiritual practice leads us to the revelation about our own true nature. Okay? So the yoga system is actually based on the Sankhya system. It also admits to 2 principles of reality. But what yoga does is that it becomes a theistic school because it has this idea of Ishvara. And Ishvara is included in the Yoga Sutra as a means of attaining a highly focused mind. Okay? So Ishvara becomes the object of our attention and our concentration, and therefore it helps us to gain this single-pointed awareness which is called ekagrata. And therefore it is called a theistic school. Then we got the Purva Mimamsa school, which is really based on the Vedic literature, and it is particularly focused on the ritualistic dimension of the Vedas. So the ritualistic dimension is all about doing our yajnas and homas in a certain way to obtain certain results. So, for example, if somebody wants to be wealthy, he will do a certain ritual which is going to be propitiated towards a certain deva or energy or power. And when that is done in a ritualistic way, the result of that karma is supposed to arise out of doing that ritual. And then we have the Uttar Mimamsa or Vedanta. Now, this is a tradition which develops from the later part of the Vedas, because the Vedas are divided into various sections. And the final portion of the Vedas is what is known as the higher knowledge. And these are the Upanishads, and the Vedanta schools themselves consist of the three major perspectives called Dvaita, Viśiṣṭādvaita, and Advaita Vedanta. Now, this is where we are coming towards now the main subject of our discussion. So, this is Uttar Mimamsa, and the major proponents are Śaṅkarācārya, Rāmānujācārya, and Madhvācārya. Yeah. Yes. I'm just considering the three major schools. Okay, I'll come to that in a minute. So, these are the three major I'm going to consider today. Of course, at a later time, I can always come back to the other ones, because there is Nimmakacharya and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and all those different schools which are there, which I'll mention in a minute. So, what is Vedanta? Vedanta is the knowledge which is Veda, and Anta, which is the end. So it can be interpreted in two ways. It is the final section of the Vedas, or it can be considered as the final or the ultimate knowledge. And Vedanta refers to the various schools of thought and philosophy which again appear at the end of the Vedas. So what the schools are doing in terms of Vedantic interpretation is that they are systemizing the ideas of the scriptures in such a way that the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra, which are known as the three foundational texts in Hinduism, is called the Prasthanatraya. The Prasthanatraya are the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra, and they have various different interpretations of these three major texts. Okay, so each school of Vedanta then systematically explains the nature of the individual, universe, the ultimate reality, the means of knowledge, and all these schools of Vedanta maintain that the goal of human life is to realize the ultimate reality. Okay. How the ultimate reality is described, we will see, will be different according to each particular perspective. But basically what it's saying is that the goal of life is not to kind of enjoy and have pleasure through the senses, but the ultimate goal of life is to realize the ultimate reality so that we can escape from this cycle of birth and death. So, again, the idea is that each school will differ according to how they conceive the reality, what the realization is, what the relationship with that reality is, and how is this going to be achieved. And they, as I was saying before, that they also prescribe ways in which that reality is going to be reached. Okay? And each one will have a different idea about how that reality is to be reached. So what are the schools of Vedanta? This is what you're asking about, is that, there are several schools of Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta, which is founded by or propounded by Shankara-acharya ji, which was in the year 788 to 820. He lived for a short time only, and we'll see his life story as how it develops and how much he achieved within that lifespan. We've got the Viśiṣṭādvaita of Rāmānujācārya, 11th century, Dvaita Vedanta, 13th century. Then we got the Advaita Vedanta of Nimmakacharya, which is in the 12th century. Shuddha Advaita of Vallabhacārya. I'm sure some of you will know Vallabhacārya is which tradition? Pushtimar, good. So Vallabhacārya is 15th century. Then we got the Achintaya Bheda Abheda, which is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And this is, of course, we see it in the modern form of ISKCON. Okay, so these are different schools. So I'm just going to focus on the first three. Okay, so let's look at Advaita Vedanta, which is the Vedanta which was propounded by Śaṅkarācārya. So here you can see Shankara-acharya sitting with his four main disciples. So Shankara was born in Kaladi, which is present-day central Kerala, and in India in 1788, and he was born in a very poor family, and the parents had been praying to Shiva for a long time because they didn't have children. So what happened, the story is that Shiva appeared to both the husband and the wife in their dreams at the same time, in the same night, and offered them a choice. He said, do you want a child who is going to be a mediocre son and would live a long time, or do you want an extraordinary son but would not live for long? So the choice, of course, they made was that they wanted the extraordinary son, even if it's not going to live for a long time. That is what they chose. So here you can see the parents with the son who has been born, and it is said that even when he was born, all different kinds of things begin to appear. And of course, the stories of these saints and sages, various different narratives develop around the birth and the life of the saints. So the other story which is there is that when he was about 8 years old, the father has actually passed away when he was about 5 years old. So he was with the mother, and both of them were living in a small hut. They were very poor at that time, and the mother used to work. And once they went for a bath in the river, and Śaṅkarācārya, 8 years old, he was swimming there, and his leg was actually caught by a crocodile. So when this happened, and he thought, now this is going to be the end of my life. So he shouted to the mother. The mother was standing on the bank. He shouted to the mother, Mother, please let me become a sannyasi. In other words, let me become a renunciate right now, before I die. Because even if it's for a few moments, I just want to become a renunciate. So the mother, thinking that, this son is going to die, said, okay, yeah, you go ahead, and I will count you as a renunciate now, or as a sannyasi. The moment she said that, the story goes that the crocodile released the leg of Śaṅkarācārya and disappeared. So from that point onwards, Śaṅkarācārya was considered to be a renunciate. And the mother, knowing that now this means that he is not going to get married, and he's not going to. There is not going to be any progeny. There's not going to be any, children in the family, or the wife, and therefore, she started lamenting about the whole thing. So, even this is what happened. Is finally the mother gave the consent, and then Śaṅkarācārya was studying under various different teachers until the age of 16 in and around Kerala, and. At the age of 16, he left Kerala to travel towards North India in search of a guru. So on the banks of the Narmada river, he actually met somebody called Govinda Bhagavatapada, and he was a disciple of Gaudapada at Omkareshwara. Now this is again there are stories about his own guru, whereby there was a flood which was taking place in the river. And what he did, he took one of the container which they normally carry, the ascetics normally carry that container, and he put the container like this, and it took all the flood waters away. Now, Śaṅkarācārya, when he saw that, of course, he became absolutely, fascinated by that. And then, of course, there's the story of Śaṅkarācārya and his famous debates. He used to go around the country debating with various different scholars in various different schools, and he would discuss with them and debate with them, and it is said that he would come out the winner 99% of the time. Here's when now something extraordinary happened, is that the person he went to debate with was a highly ritualistic person. He was always performing rituals, and he never believed in anything to do with, this ultimate reality and this one Brahman which is there. So he had a debate with Śaṅkarācārya. So the wife called Bharati was actually the umpire. So she sat between the two men, and she said, okay, now tell me what your arguments are, and I'm going to decide who is going to be the winner. So both of them were discussing for several days. They discussed in detail, the philosophies of both the Uttar Mimamsa and the Purva Mimamsa. And finally what happened is that Mandan Mishra himself was defeated by Śaṅkarācārya. Okay? So Bharati, being a clever woman, said, actually you only defeated one half of me. Okay? One half of Mandan Mishra, because here I'm the other half. Now you have to defeat me. Okay? And the question she asked Śaṅkarācārya is that, what do you know about the relationship between man and woman? Knowing that he is an ascetic, he is a sannyasi, he has no knowledge of that. Okay? So Śaṅkarācārya said, okay, hang on, just give me 15 days and then we'll resume the debate. Now this is the story, is that during those 15 days, Śaṅkarācārya ji actually leaves his body and makes the disciples to sit around the body and protect it, and says, don't leave this body, because I'm going to exit this body and enter another body of a king, and then I'm going to find out what is this relationship between man and woman. So what he did, he exited the body, and there was just about a dying king, and he was just dying, and the moment he died, Śaṅkarācārya entered his body. So nobody knew that this king had actually passed away and there's something else. So now the queen, seeing that, this is not the same person who was there before, this can't be my husband, something has happened. Because he looks so learned and he's so wise and he's got so much presence of mind as well. So then she was told by the wise man that actually this is not your husband, but this is a noble soul which has entered the body of your husband, and we have to find out where the other body is. Because if we want this king for your husband, then what do we have to do? What do you think he has to do? Get rid of the other body, right? And that body was being guarded by Śaṅkarācārya's disciples. So they went looking for this body, and they found this body, and they were just about to destroy it when Śaṅkarācārya actually exited out of the body and came back into his original body. Then they had a discussion with the wife, Bharati, and he completely defeated her as well. So in the process, what happens is that Mandan Mishra becomes one of the foremost disciples of Śaṅkarācārya, and is given his name of Sureshwara-acharya. So Sureshwara-acharya, in fact, has this kind of story behind it. And this is another story of disciple Padmapada. I don't know whether you like these stories or not. Now, here's Śaṅkarācārya, and he was actually with his disciples. So they were on one side of the river, and they crossed across. And when they crossed across, Śaṅkarācārya ji says, where is this disciple called, I forget the name. It is, anyway, he says, where is this disciple? Now this disciple, which seemed to have got lost somewhere, was actually considered to be a dumbo, what is known as that he didn't have any kind of capacity. He used to just do the menial chores in the ashram. He used to do all the kind of cleaning and cooking and all these kind of things. So people, the other disciple used to laugh at him because he couldn't understand, he couldn't express himself very well. So when Śaṅkarācārya asked, where is this disciple? And the other disciples looked, look, you can see him across the river. He's not yet managed to cross. So Śaṅkarācārya ji actually called out to him. And he says, you come here because we are now moving on. So this disciple actually, instead of swimming or looking for a bridge, he started walking on the water. And every step he took, there appeared a lotus in the river. And he stepped on the lotus, kept on stepping on the lotus, and he was on the other side. So all the disciples were amazed. How is this that this particular disciple, has this kind of miracle which has come about because of that? And Śaṅkarācārya told them, you think this is an ordinary person? You think this person doesn't have brains? You think this is just another, person who does cooking and cleaning? In fact, he has got the purest of hearts. His heart is so pure, it is like a lotus. And that is why every step he took, the lotus came out and he was able to cross this river without any effort. So that's another story of Śaṅkarācārya. And that's why he was called Padmapada, because Padma means the lotus and Pada means the feet. And that is what So Śaṅkarācārya then, through his kind of sixth sense, or what we call the intuition, or the higher knowledge, he knew that now the mother is sick and she's going to pass away. Now the sannyasi is not supposed to do the last rites. Normally in the Hindu family, it is the son who does the last rites of the parents. So, but in this case, he could not do it because he was an ascetic, he was a sannyasi. So he went to the mother and he comforted her, and he himself then took her on the pyre. And he was being criticized by all the other Brahmins, saying, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to do this." But he went ahead anyway. And it is said that when he held the mother in his arms and put her on the funeral pyre, actually she attained the state of liberation through the power of Śaṅkarācārya himself. So, what are those are the stories about Śaṅkarācārya, but what are the ideas of Advaita Vedanta? So the ideas of Advaita Vedanta are basically these 5 things which we need to consider. Number 1, Brahman, Atma, which is the self. Brahman is the one reality. Maya is the power of illusion. Avidya, which is ignorance of the truth. And moksha, liberation whilst living. So we will look at each one of these in slightly more detail, because why I'm looking at this in more detail is because the other proponents of the other schools of Vedanta actually based their responses on the Advaita Vedanta school. They were responses on this particular school. So I will go into a slightly more detail about Advaita Vedanta. So what Śaṅkarācārya says about Brahman is that Brahma Satyam Jagathamithya Jiva Brahmeva Napara, which means Brahman is the only truth. Brahman is the only truth, and this world is an illusion. It is unreal. And ultimately there is no difference between Brahman and the essence of the individual self, which is Atman. Okay. So this is a very kind of fundamental principle of Advaita Vedanta, is that there is only one reality. You remember the other school was talking about 2 realities. Which was that? Brahma Satya, Jagat Satya, which is the Sankhya school. Okay, the Sankhya school accepts the reality of the world as well as reality of Brahman. Okay? So here he says Jagat is mithya. Jagat is just an appearance. It is an illusion. It does not really exist. So you and I don't exist. In fact, I'm talking to a non-existent audience, and you are listening to a non-existent speaker. Okay? According to Advaita Vedanta, that is the nature of reality. So Brahman is the ultimate, it is the supreme reality. There is no ultimate reality beyond Brahman. Brahman is the ultimate reality, and Brahman cannot be perceived, nor could it be described by words. In other words, it's a transcendental reality which goes beyond any kind of instruments of the body or the mind or the intellect. You cannot think and say to yourself, this is Brahman and I know Brahman. Knowing Brahman is not an intellectual process, but knowing Brahman is becoming Brahman. That is the only way in which Brahman can be known. So it cannot be perceived through the senses, it cannot be known by the mind, and it is a transcendental reality which can only be directly experienced. So it is beyond the senses, it is beyond the intellect, it is indefinable. It is pure consciousness. In other words, Brahman is taken as pure consciousness, whereas the consciousness which you and I have is a conditioned consciousness. Okay? And Brahman is referred to as Sat Chit and Anand. If we are to describe what Brahman is, we can describe it in terms of these three attributes, because in reality Brahman has no attributes, but we can say it is Sat Chit and Anand. It is pure existence, pure consciousness and pure bliss. So what would be the experience of a person who has realized Brahman would be, he will be in complete pure consciousness, pure existence and in pure bliss all the time. So Brahman, what is that again? It is eternal, immutable, inexpressible, unthinkable, pure existence, but it is not the cause of any of these things which we see around us. Okay? Now this causality principle I will describe in a minute, but it means that the way Advaita Vedanta sees, there is a causeless cause, if one sees what that means, is that there is only Brahman. Nothing can arise out of Brahman, because the rest of the things which we are looking at are not reality and they are an apparent reality. So there cannot be a cause which is giving rise to this kind of effect. How that is explained is in terms of the principle of Maya. So the Atman can be said is the innermost self or the spirit of man, but is different from the empirical ego. Okay? Now the empirical ego is what you and me are experiencing now as this individual person who is in this time and space and existing as an individual, having a certain set of desires, expressing them in the transactional world, and that is the empirical ego, where the idea of I-ness is there, the idea of me is there, the idea of mine is there. Whereas Atman is the inner essence. Okay, the inner consciousness which is devoid of the ego is called the Atman. So Atman is fundamental, it is ultimate, it is eternal, it is immutable, pure consciousness. So you will see that actually it is describing the same things as Brahman. Okay, that's why he says Brahman and Atman are really nothing but the same thing. Okay. Atman is pure spirit in all beings, and that pure spirit which is talking about the essence of an individual is of the same essence as Brahman itself. So Brahman and Atman are no two different realities. So the other idea is that if you say that Brahman is the only reality, then what am I experiencing now? I'm experiencing something, isn't it? You and I are experiencing this individuality. We are experiencing the world around us. We can see it is cold, it is hot, it is this, it is that. Senses are picking up all these things from the external world. And when we get up in the morning, we know that this is the reality which we have woken up to. Where is that coming from? If you say Brahman is the only reality, then how do you explain this reality which we are experiencing now? So bring in the idea of Maya. So what Śaṅkarācārya is saying is this is a relative reality which is looking as if it is real, but in fact it is not real, and it is caused by this principle of Maya, which is inherent in Brahman itself. Okay? Now what is this Maya? He says the Maya is the one which is making this world of phenomena to manifest itself. Okay? And Maya is really responsible for what we call creation. Creation is coming about because of this principle of Maya, and it is this relative reality, but in fact we cannot say it is real in the sense in which we talk about Brahman itself. So the Maya is said to be consisting of the three gunas or the three attributes. So when we describe the phenomenal world, we can think about describing it in terms of sattva, rajas, tamas. Okay, three different gunas or three different attributes which are related to the phenomenal world. And as soon as this kind of relative reality comes about, it comes with this package of the three gunas. And the three gunas are the ones which make you and me to actually function in the world. So appearance and reality. I think you might have seen this before. What do you think it looks like? So it looks as if it's two faces of women, right? But if you look closely, this is a trunk of a tree, and there are two birds which are flying, three birds which are there, and it appears as if it is a face. Now this is what Vedanta says, is because of this Maya, we take one thing to be another. Okay? We take this particular formation of the tree and the birds, it looks like a face. And similarly on the other side, you can see it is just the flowers and the buds which are looking as if it is making up another face, and there is a small butterfly which is making up the nose. So one of the famous examples in Advaita Vedanta is the snake and the rope analogy. So the famous example in Advaita Vedanta is the snake and the rope analogy, whereby if I'm walking in the dark and I see an object in front of me, I mistake it to be the snake. Okay? And having mistaken it for the snake, my reactions towards that object are one of fear, so that I want to run away from this object which I've seen as the snake. But my friend says, hang on, don't run away, I'm going to switch on the light. And when he switches on the light, what I see in front of me is just a rope. Now, what has made me to think that this is the snake which I saw in the darkness, is because of my perception. And the perception was faulty because the light was not available, and in the darkness I made a faulty assumption about what I was seeing. In the same way, the idea that I'm seeing this world is because of the principle of Maya, and one can say this phenomenal world is actually a superimposition on this principle of Brahman, or the ultimate reality. So in this case, the rope is the Brahman, and the superimposition of the snake on the rope is the phenomenal world. In other words, the relationship between the ultimate reality and this phenomenal reality is one of superimposition. Okay? And when this superimposition is dissolved, and there is a prescription for doing that, then what we see, just like when we switch on the light, what do we see? We see the snake as it is. When the superimposition is dissolved, then what we see is the ultimate reality. So how do we go about dissolving that? We are going to see in a minute. I don't know where the snake has disappeared. Oh, there it is. So it looks like a snake, but it is in fact a rope. Okay, so another idea which is central to understanding Advaita Vedanta is avidya. Avidya means not only the absence of knowledge, but also erroneous knowledge. In other words, the non-apprehension of the reality causes a misapprehension of what I am perceiving. Again, another important principle in Advaita Vedanta, which means that if we say everything is Brahman, then why is it that I'm not able to experience it here and now? What is wrong? It means that there is something called avidya which is stopping me from realizing the ultimate reality. And what is that? That is a superimposition. It is the superimposition of the body and the mind and the intellect on the ultimate reality, which is making or stopping me from realizing that ultimate reality. So then he goes to talk about this power of Maya, which gives rise to this adhyasa, and that adhyasa begins to develop as ignorance or the avidya. And the two powers of Maya are said to be the power of veiling, avarana, and the power of vikshepa, distortion or projection. So Maya brings in this, has these powers to create this distortion and makes us to think that it is that face of the woman I'm looking at, or it is the snake I'm seeing, rather than the trunk of a tree and the birds and instead of seeing the rope, I see the snake. Now this is the illusory power of Maya. This is how Advaita Vedanta actually explains what we are experiencing now. So under the influence of Maya and Avidya, the person, you and me, dissociate ourselves from this ultimate reality. In other words, there is now a separation between the ultimate reality and the individual. And that, when one acquires the knowledge, the duality of the self and Brahman disappears, and the self is realized really as Brahman itself. So this realization of the self puts an end to the ignorance, or it puts an end to the avidya, which is really not knowing what the truth is. And at that point, when the truth is realized, what we have is moksha, liberation. In other words, what Advaita Vedanta is saying, there's one reality, we don't know that reality. If we develop the means, or if we practice our various different practices of spiritual practice, then through those practices, that particular veil is going to be removed, and we realize that we are not this individual, but we are indeed, our essence is pure consciousness. So this moksha is that idea is that we are, as I was telling you before, is that we are in the grip of incessant desires, that expressing desires throughout our lifetime. And this could be 100 different desires. Each person has got a different set of desires. That's what makes one person to be different from the other. And when that Brahman is realized, when that ultimate reality is realized, one becomes free of this desires, karma, and also the ignorance as well. And what is this method by which this thing is going to be removed? What is the method by which the veil or the covering is going to be removed? Is that he mentions these 4 methods or the 4 practices called Viveka, Vairagya, Satsampati, and Mumukshutva.
The fourfold qualifications are the Sanskrit viveka, a discrimination and analysis between the eternal and the non-eternal, that there is this spiritual reality. It's not that we already know it, but we feel that such a thing may be there. And everything else is secondary. All the other pursuits of life, they take second place to this finding out. That is primary and eternal reality, this difference. This clarity must be there. Anybody who defines himself or herself as a spiritual seeker, as most of us here do, we already have that. Otherwise, we would not be seeking. That's one. In Sanskrit, it's called viveka. Literally, it means to separate 2 things. Second, vairagya. Literally, it means dispassion. That when we are pulled in 100 different directions, spiritual life becomes impossible. So, an overwhelming conviction that I want enlightenment in this life. And all the other things, they take second place to it. Whether it is relationships or money or whatever it is in the world. They're all there, but they're all secondary. A monk gives up all of those and pursues enlightenment solely. And a person in the world, in samsara, cannot give up all of that, but it makes it secondary and makes the pursuit of enlightenment primary. Third, the sixfold treasure, Shat Sampatti. So there's a trick here. They are packed 6 into 1. So the fourfold qualification has now increased to 9. The sixfold treasure, in 2 words you can say spiritual discipline. Shama, a calmness of mind. Dhamma, a control of our external organs. If you're always running around and always you want to go and see a movie or something like that, difficult. So Shama and Dhamma, they go together. Inner calmness and an external control of our organs, sense organs and motor organs. Then Uparati, a withdrawing inwards, a not seeking satisfaction outside. You're still permitted to have the nice food which is awaiting us at 10 o'clock, but that's all right. But that the world outside is not the source of my satisfaction. That is called Uparati. And then the fourth one is Samadhana, a settledness, focus, concentration on my spiritual path, not getting scattered in many things. The fifth one is Titiksha. Titiksha literally means toughness. Not physical toughness. Physical toughness helps, emotional toughness helps, but a spiritual toughness, a spiritual fortitude, that no matter what, I am going to pursue this path. I am going to pursue enlightenment in this life. See, we put up with so much trouble for holding a job, for raising a family. So much of hard work and suffering goes into it. So can we put, with even a fraction of that, one can become enlightened. It's not my words. Some great teachers in our tradition, they said it, that when they would see these young people who are working for exams and university exams, with the fraction of the energy that you put into this, you can become enlightened. So a spiritual toughness, that no matter what happens, I'll pursue this. And then Shraddha. Shraddha means a faith, a working faith. If you go to a university and want to learn physics or something, there also one has a little bit of faith that the teachers are not lying, the textbooks are not all fake or something. So that kind of working faith, that there is something to this, let me listen, let me try to find out and understand, that is enough. Shraddha. So these are the six disciplines. They're called sixfold treasure. And the last one, if you're confused, what do you mean last? The four. Viveka, the discrimination between the real and the unreal, the eternal and non-eternal. Vairagya, the dispassion, and the sixfold treasure which we just did. And the fourth one is called mumukshutvam, which literally means an intense desire for freedom. An intense desire for freedom. So these fourfold qualifications, with these, this becomes direct. Without these, this does not become direct. A great teacher once told me, with these qualifications, when you listen to the teachings of any text like Aparokshanubhuti, it becomes a fact. Yes, it is so. My God, why did I not see it earlier? And without these qualifications, or without sufficient amount of these qualifications, when we read it, you know what the result will be? I get what you are saying, but it's some kind of philosophy, it's some kind of nice theory. It doesn't seem to be real. That doesn't seem to be real to me is because I lack the foundational preparation for that, the fourfold qualification.
Now this is what is known as Antakarna Shuddhi, which takes place where the me and the mind, the ego gets purified of the me and the mind, and then in that silence of the inner world, one begins to get a glimpse of that higher reality. So moksha is attained here and now. What the Advaita Vedanta says, it's not something which is going to be attained at the end of life. It is not that it is going to come after death, but it can be attained whilst one is living. Okay? So that is another difference between some of the other philosophies. So there you are. That is a kind of a very general overview of Advaita Vedanta, and the central focus of that philosophy is Brahman, and saying that there is only one reality, and that reality is unknown to us at the moment, but can be known through various practices which can be carried out. So now we come to Viśiṣṭādvaita Vedanta, Viśiṣṭādvaita Vedanta, which is attributed to Rāmānujācārya. So he was also born in a Brahmin family with very close connection with the South Indian Vaishnavism. So in South India, there was a lot of Vaishnavism during that time, during the 11th century, and his close relatives, most of them were Vaishnavites. And when he went to study with Yadav Prakasha, who followed the Shankara-acharya philosophy, so Ramanuja used to argue with him again and again. He says, this cannot be true. How do you have this reality which I'm experiencing now? And you're telling me that this is just an appearance. It is an illusion. It cannot be an illusion. Because if we believe in God, then this is really something which is concrete, something which is perceptible by the senses. So all those kind of arguments, he was going on and on with this Yadav Prakasha. And he was challenging again and again. So what happened? He was expelled. Just like, this is a naughty boy, now you expel him from the school because he keeps on making noise and challenging the teachers. Of course, it won't happen these days. But during that time, depending on what kind of teacher it was anyway, because he was thinking that he's going to be challenged, and he was under the influence, under the influence of Shankara-acharya, and was teaching that Vedantic philosophy, and Rāmānuja could not actually agree with that, and therefore he was challenging and got expelled from the school. And then he came under the influence of Yamunacārya, not Yamunacārya directly, but one of his disciples called Mahapurna, who was his uncle. Okay. Now this is the Vaishnava philosophy which was being followed. So he followed that particular tradition. He began to think about, what it means, because he was already exposed to Śaṅkarācārya and the Advaita philosophy, and now he was exposed to the Vaishnavism, and he tried to reconcile these two kind of traditions by developing what is known as Viśiṣiṣṭādvaita Vedanta, which is where he says that Brahman and Atman are not exactly the same thing. You remember Advaita Vedanta was saying that in essence the two things are one and the same. So this is another story of the Rāmānujācārya, is that he went to see Yamunacārya, who was his teacher's teacher. He wanted to meet him because he was a great person, he was a great sage, and when he reached the place where he was, he found that it had already passed away. Okay. And when he saw that 3 of the fingers of the master were bent like this. Okay? They were bent like this. So Rāmānuja says, actually this master has passed away with 3 wishes. And he went into a kind of meditation, and he says, I know what those 3 wishes are. He says, number 1, I am supposed to deliver the people by teaching them Sri Vaishnavism, the tradition of Vaishnava. So when he spoke that particular directive or spoke that particular desire, one of the fingers uncurled. He spoke about the second one. He says, write a commentary on the Brahma Sutra. The second finger became straight. And when he says, I have to spread the glory of Parashara, who is the speaker of the Vishnu Puran, the third finger also straightened out. So now this is the story which is said to be related to Rāmānujācārya, and you can see he was also kind of, in a sense, endowed with this kind of knowledge whereby he could know what was going on. The other story which is there with Rāmānujācārya is that he was keen to get a mantra so that he could meditate on that mantra. So he went to a teacher. And the teacher told him, go away, I don't know, I'm not going to give you a mantra. I don't want to know you. Okay? So he went back again and again and again. Rāmānuja was a very stubborn person. He used to challenge the teachers, he used to go again and again. And he told him, no, I'm not going to shift from here until you give me the mantra. So eventually he was given the mantra, and he gave him secretly in the ear. He says, now don't tell anybody this secret mantra. So what Rāmānuja did, he went to the top of the temple and he shouted this mantra, Om Namo Narayana, to the whole world. So the teacher really got mad at him. He says, what are you doing? This is supposed to be a secret mantra. He says, no, how can it be secret? Because God is everywhere and everybody has to know God. How can you say this is a secret mantra? It can't be a secret. So this is... So what Viśiṣṭādvaita then tells us is that Rāmānujācārya actually rejected the idea of Nirguna Brahman. Nirguna means that without any attributes. And he says Brahman cannot be impersonal. It cannot be a reality which has got no attributes, and it is impersonal. It does not have any kind of feeling associated with it. But he says that there has to be a Saguna Brahma, which means it has to be a reality with a name and form and various different attributes, and these attributes are of the highest quality. Okay. So this is the big difference between Advaita Vedanta and Viśiṣṭādvaita. He accepts there is Brahman, but he says Brahman is not impersonal, but it is a very personal Brahman which has got attributes. He also rejected the idea of Maya. He says Maya actually is an unreal illusion. He says the world is real and Brahman is real, And if you say that the world is an illusion, then you are diminishing God's creativity, power and grace. And he says Vishnu is Brahman and Brahman is Vishnu. In other words, the Vishnu, Lord Vishnu, is really the personification of that ultimate reality, and it is the supreme soul of Vishnu, which is that ultimate reality. And this world is the body of God. Here again is a very major difference between Advaita Vedanta. What was Advaita Vedanta saying about the world? It is an illusion. Rāmānuja says, it can't be an illusion. This is the body of God. In fact, this is the manifest, immanent form of God, which is this whole creation is nothing but the body of God. And he says, Brahman is the soul of this universe, this whole creation, just as it is the soul which inhabits our own bodies. And he says the self is no different from Brahman, but there is some difference in terms of the qualities. So the qualities are slightly different. He says Brahman, like the color red, is a quality of the rose, distinguishable from it, but still interfused with its being. So he makes a differentiation between the essence and the quality of that essence. Okay? So here he's kind of making a slight differentiation between Brahman and the self. But he says essentially they are the same, but there is a difference. So the individual selves are modes or prakara of Brahman. So the individual persons are not in fact illusions which are there according to Advaita Vedanta, but he says each one is a kind of part and parcel of Brahman, and each self is nothing but a spark of the divine, which is different from Advaita Vedanta. But he says Brahman is fully present in each part and transcends them all. So this transcendental reality is the transcendental personality with the infinite superlative qualities, and he is the Lord Vishnu, and he is also known as Narayana. So Viśiṣṭādvaita Vedanta actually, Om Namo Narayana is the mantra, and that is what he was given. So the individual souls are part of Brahman. Okay? So they are not exactly Brahman, which is what Advaita Vedanta was saying, but they are part of Brahman. Okay? And they retain their separate identities even after moksha. Whereas Advaita Vedanta says that if you realize who you truly are, you become one with Brahman. There is no difference. Whereas here it says, even after liberation, you retain your own individuality. And how is liberation to be attained? Whereas in the path of Advaita Vedanta, it was a knowledge-based process or practice. Here it is based on pure intense devotion. And he says the best way of knowing Brahman is the path of devotion and also path of karma yoga, and rather than Advaita path of knowledge. And upasana is the devotional contemplation of the Supreme Lord, and prapati is the liberation attained by self-surrender to God's grace. Okay? So prapti is liberation, which is through intense devotion. And by surrendering completely to the Lord, one attains his grace, and that becomes liberation as far as Viśiṣṭādvaita is concerned. So Rāmānuja was Sri Vaishnava, and he tried to combine the popular worship of Vishnu, which was, as I was saying, prevalent in South India as well as later on in North India as well, with Advaita Vedanta. Okay, so that is two covered. Now another one, which is Madhvācārya, which is called Dvaita Vedanta, which is the first one was non-dual, the second one was qualified non-dual, and this is dual Vedanta. So this is a dualistic Vedanta which was propounded by Madhvācārya. So again, Brahmin family, he was born near Udupi, which is now what is known as the Karnataka state. He never got married. In fact, Rāmānuja got married, and of course he left the wife at a certain stage. But Madhvācārya never got married. He took the vow of sannyasi when he was even a teenager, and studied under Achyuta Prajna. And again, constantly challenging him, because Achyuta Prajna was also a Shankara follower, and he was teaching Advaita Vedanta, and he was constantly being challenged by Madhvācārya, saying this interpretation cannot be right. So the teachers were very impressed, and instead of expelling him, he made him a successor. So, it depends on which teacher you get. So he also went around, India, engaged in debates with opponents, Buddhists, Jains, Advaita Vedantins, and he came out top most of the times. One story is that he went to the Himalayas on his journeys, and he met with the Vyasa, the author of Mahabharata. You remember Mahabharata took place 3,000 years ago, before the time of Madhvācārya. So it is said that he actually met Vyasa himself, and Vyasa told him, you need to write a commentary on the Brahma Sutra, which Rāmānujā and Shankara had already done. So he wrote a commentary on Brahma Sutra as well. He wrote 37 other texts and commentaries, including many of the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita as well. And his biography actually speaks of him as a very strong person, physical strength, as well as absolutely intellectual strength as well, and very good of heart, with a powerful personality. So he went around India and he settled down near Udupi, where he established a mata, or the ashram. So Dvaita Vedanta proposes the existence of two separate realities, rather than saying there is only one reality, or there is a reality, there is kind of qualified reality which exists as well. He says that there are two separate realities. The first and the foremost is the reality that it is Brahman, but again as the name and form of Vishnu. And Vishnu is the Supreme Self, the God, and the absolute truth of the universe. So ultimate truth is now defined in terms of Dvaita Vedanta as the name and form of Vishnu. And this has completely independent existence from the creation. So this is called the Swatantra reality, or the Swatantra independent reality, independent of the creation itself. So creator and creation actually stand apart in terms of Dvaita. So he says Vishnu is not just any other deity, but singularly the most important supreme person. So Supreme Person is that ultimate reality. He comes in the name of Vishnu, again like Rāmānuja, comes as the Supreme Personality. But here what Madhvācārya says is that the individual is actually completely apart from that reality of God. So he says Vishnu is the primary object of worship, and every other god is regarded as subordinate to him. In other words, there is a hierarchy of gods, where Vishnu is the highest god, and he has got the primary attributes, the most excellent attributes which can be there for the Supreme Person. And he says the will of God is behind each and every cause and effect. So it recognizes again cause and effect and a relationship between them, but he says the process by which the effect comes out from the cause is only by the will of God. Okay? So in Christianity, of course, we say nothing moves. Even the blade of grass, when it is moving, it is only by the will of God. Similar idea here. So the second reality is the reality of the universe. He says this is equally real. In other words, it reminds us of the Sankhya principle of Purusha and Prakriti. But here he says the universe itself is real, and it exists with its own separate essence. In other words, the essence of God is different from the essence of the creation. And everything is composed of the second reality, which that is composed of the second reality, such as the individual soul, you and me. Matter exist with their own separate reality. Now here, God takes on a personal role and is seen as the governor and controller of the whole universe. So whereas it is a separate reality, okay, just like I'm controlling the computer by pressing keys, and my existence is separate from the laptop. So he says also the realities are different, but God actually controls everything which is there in the universe. Each thing is unique in itself and cannot be reduced to something else. Okay? Again, that is idea in Dvaita Vedanta, and he says each phenomena in the world is also unique by its particularity. So you cannot take and say everything is Brahman, there is no difference between you and me, everything is different according to Dvaita, I am different from you, and there is some particular attributes which separate me and you, which is different from what Advaita Vedanta was saying. So these are the 5 categories which Advaita Vedanta points out, that there is a difference between God and the self, Jivatma, which is called the Bimba Pratibimba principle, between the innumerable selves, which is you and me. There's differences between those as well. There's difference between God and matter, okay, and between self and matter, between phenomena within matter, but nothing can exist outside God's will. Everything depends on God. This is what Madhvācārya says. So, he says the Lord is in essence unknowable. Whereas Viśiṣṭādvaita, Advaita Vedanta was saying, if you actually go through this process of your spiritual practice, you can become one with Brahman. He says, no, this is not possible. God is unknowable. He pervades the self as an inner witness, inner controller, and there is a hierarchy of selves. Of the purer it is, the higher the self, and liberation is nothing but the self-enjoyment of the innate Satchitanand, a participation in the bliss of the Lord. Okay? So even he says, liberation is attained through devotion. The individual and God, because they are of different, they are of different essence, they always remain different. They can never be one. Okay? One cannot become one with God. This is the implication here. So how does one actually go about attaining this intimacy with God? Because that is what it is all about. You cannot become one with God, but you can attain a very high level of intimacy with God by hearing His God's majesty, singing His praise, chanting His name, worshipping of images, salutation to His presence in all beings, cultivating the attitude of servant of God, serving people, serving the world is how one can actually serve God, and cultivating this intimacy with Him and wholehearted offering of oneself to God. This is the way of bhakti, as Madhvācārya points out. So these are the 3 phases of Vedanta. Which one is which? Number 1 is which one? Huh? Śaṅkarācārya is in the middle. Yes, good. Which is the one on the left hand? That is Rāmānuja, and this is Madhvācārya. So if you simply want to depict it, what are the differences between these 3 philosophies, it can be done very simply like this. In the middle is Śaṅkarācārya. There is only one Brahman. Okay? The essence of oneself is the same essence as Brahman, no difference. On your left-hand side is that individual is part of God, which means the smaller circle is the individual and the larger circle is Brahman. And on this side, God is different from the individual. Okay? So now you will all be able to explain the 3 traditions in Vedanta very simply put like this. Okay? So I hope that is helpful. So there you are. Thank you very much.